here. Here's Paul Krugman. Quote, "It's appalling on every level." Now, he's quoting Jonathan Zasloff, the economist judge just quoted, saying that Geithner, he might be replacing Geithner, Obama is, if he gets rid of him, with, quote, "the rotting corpse of Andrew Mellon." You know who Andrew Mellon was? He was Herbert Hoover's Treasury Secretary, who, according to Hoover, told him to, quote, "liquidate the workers, liquidate the farmers, purge the rottenness." Now that sounds like a Republican if I ever heard one, okay? And some shades of the lieutenant governor from South Carolina there. The answer to apparently tough economic times is liquidate the poor, okay? So this is the direction that the country's leading economists think that the Obama administration is going in. Quoting Andrew Mellon, that's pretty harsh, okay? Now, one last one from Krugman. "It's a betrayal of everything Obama supporters thought they were working for. Just like that, Obama has embraced and validated the Republican worldview. More specifically, he has embraced the policy ideas of the man he defeated in 2008. A correspondent writes, I feel like an idiot for supporting this guy." You beginning to get the sense of how angry people are over this? Look, and I got more here. I can go to Simon Johnson. Now, Ezra Klein had a great piece about it. He's not an economist. He's a writer for the Washington Post. We got Mark Toma, who's normally an understated economist, going ballistic. I can quote you these economists all day long, but I want to quote you someone else, okay? And he is candidate Barack Obama. And I remember when he thought that doing discretionary spending was a terrible idea, or a freeze on discretionary spending. Let's go to that, and then, again, come back and tell you why this is such a terrible path for him. Let's watch Obama in the debates.
How about a spending freeze on everything but defense, veteran affairs, and entitlement programs?
Spending freeze?
I think we ought to seriously consider, with the exceptions of caring for our veterans, national defense, and several other vital issues.
Would you go for that?
Well, the problem with a spending freeze is you're using a hatchet where you need a scalpel. There are some programs that are very important that are currently underfunded. I want to increase early childhood education. And the notion that we should freeze that when there may be, for example, this Medicare subsidy, I think doesn't make...
Oops. Here comes the second debate.
It's important for the president to set a tone that says all of us are going to contribute, all of us are going to make sacrifices, and it means that, yes, we may have to cut some spending, although I disagree with Senator McCain about an across-the-board freeze. That's an example of an unfair burden sharing. That's using a hatchet to cut the federal budget. I want to use a scalpel so that people who need help are getting help, and those of us like myself and Senator McCain who don't need help aren't getting it. That's how we make sure that everybody is willing to make a few sacrifices.
You want to see it again? Let's go to the third.
And I think it's very commendable, the work she's done on behalf of special needs. I agree with that, John. I do want to just point out that autism, for example, or other special needs, will require some additional funding if we're going to get serious in terms of research. That is something that every family that advocates on behalf of disabled children talk about. And if we have a across-the-board spending freeze, we're not going to be able to do it. That's an example of, I think, the kind of the use of the scalpel that we want to make sure that we're funding some of those programs. Well, look, I think that we do have a disagreement about across-the-board spending freeze. It sounds good. It's proposed periodically. It doesn't happen. And, in fact, an across-the-board spending freeze is a hatchet. And we do need a scalpel because there's some programs that don't work at all. There's some programs that are underfunded. And I want to make sure that we are focused on those programs that work.
Would you go for that?
Well, the problem with a spending freeze is you're using a hatchet where you need a scalpel.
No mas. No mas. I'm calling it. We can go on all day long with Obama busting himself up. Okay? I mean, is it a hatchet or a scalpel? I can't tell. Before it appeared that it was a hatchet, now all of a sudden it's a scalpel, right? Because now all of a sudden Obama's in favor of McCain's proposal. And guess what McCain says today? Of course, he says, not enough. Of course, of course. If you keep giving them to the Queen, they're going to ask for the King. You think they're going to be satisfied with that? Of course they're not satisfied. And now, to be fair to Obama, look, this has some flexibility. So it's a spending cap overall, right? But he can move funding around. So now he would come back and say, look, in those debates, I said, I want to be able to give money to some places and not to others. and he's going to come turn around and say, well, look, I got a freezing spending cap, but at least I can move it within departments. But if he increases the department, one department, he's got to decrease another department. Understand that, okay? Now, he also has a cute little provision in there that's an emergency provision. Well, if we really need something in an emergency, then we can allocate funds for that, right? You know what that's going to be abused for? Because part of this that's being frozen, and the part that I like, is the agricultural subsidies. Those corn subsidies that are killing us, that are, have caused untold problems for the United States government and society overall, right? You think they're going to freeze those? They're not going to freeze those. Here, you can quote me on it today, okay? We'll come back and tell you, oh, well, look at that. It turns out there was an emergency, and the one thing that they decided to increase the spending on is the farm subsidies. Why? Because that's a political non-starter. That's not going to work. You think all those farm senators and congressmen and senators, they're going to let you get away with that? You think big agriculture is going to let you get away with that? Hell no. Now, that means if you increase those, well, you got to decrease the services you're giving to the poor even more. So if you didn't like this proposal now, wait till you see its execution. Okay. Now, look, every department these days is getting a 10% increase every year. Now, that's a lot, okay, lately. Now, that's not the standard thing throughout time immemorial, okay? But that was the increase last year, for example, right? Now, do I think 10% is the right number? To me, that seems high, to be honest with you. So if he came and said, look, I'm going to do a 5% increase here, but I'm going to do a 15% decrease here, and here's the reasons behind it. Well, I'm definitely listening to that, because I do believe in reducing the deficit. But if you come to me with a Republican gimmick that everybody recognizes to be a gimmick, and at the worst possible time, and you do it only to bow your head to the Republicans, well, then I'm not on board for that. That's crazy. And if you really wanted to control the deficit, you know what you'd go after? Defense spending. Are you kidding? Do you know that defense spending is larger than all discretionary spending combined? There's non-discretionary spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, etc., right? But if you take all the other discretionary spending, defense spending is larger. So why don't you include defense spending? Oh, no, but the Republicans will say I'm soft on defense. I can't do it. Look, if you're not cutting defense spending, which is loaded with pork, which is loaded with waste, and you're not going to raise taxes on the richest Americans who already benefited from this economy, well, then you're not really serious about cutting the deficit. You're playing political games. And that's why I say a hopeless politician. Now, I have so much more on this. I want to come back to it a little later. Just quick note of credit here to Senator Ben Cardin, which I did not expect. Democratic senator from Maryland says, hey, you know what? If he wants to get serious, he should cut defense spending. Now, not a lot of times the Democrat will say that because they'll be scared to death that the Republicans will beat him up over it, right? He's like, you know where the biggest waste is defense spending. If he's going to leave that alone, that this is a nonsense political trick. Score one for Senator Cardin from Maryland. Nicely done. That's exactly right. Okay? So if Obama has actual political courage, which at this point I honestly suspect he does not, which is that's the most devastating part. Not the policy implications today, but that implication, the political implication that he's just never going to do the right thing. Never going to have the courage to do it. Never going to have the courage to take them on. Well, then, I'll tell you one thing. I'll know it when I see it. It's kind of like porn, okay? When he has the political courage and he says, oh, yeah, I'm going to cut the hell out of defense spending because I think it's garbage, okay? Well, okay, then I'm open. Hey, when he says, I'm going to come after the rich. I'm not going to tax the middle class, their health care plans. I'm going to tax the rich to pay for health care. Okay, now we're having a conversation. Look, there's bounds of reason to that. But he hasn't even begun to go in that direction, if you ask me.